Imagine you are driving down a road so empty it feels like the edge of the world. The pavement is a black ribbon cutting through an ocean of sagebrush and sand, stretching toward a horizon that never seems to get any closer. Now imagine your car stops, your family disappears, and the desert simply swallows you whole. For 9 years, that is the story of the Peterson family. They drove into the heart of the Nevada desert and vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind nothing but a set of tire tracks that ended abruptly in the dust, as if their vehicle had been lifted straight into the sky. 9 years of silence, 9 years of questions, 9 years of a void. Then the shifting sands of a remote dune field, miles from any known road, finally gave up their secret. Geologists mapping the terrain found it. The family's sport utility vehicle, buried 15 feet below the surface. The doors were all locked from the inside. The mummified remains of the family were still seated within. But the driver's seatbelt, belonging to Michael Peterson, had been severed with a single, impossibly clean cut. A wound inflicted with the kind of precision one might expect from a surgeon's scalpel. It was a scene that made no sense. A terrifying tableau, sealed in a tomb of sand, posing a question that defied all logic. How could a family vanish into a locked car, only to be unearthed nearly a decade later, buried deep beneath the dunes of the loneliest road in America? Michael and Laura Peterson were not rugged adventurers or survivalists. He was a 41-year-old software engineer. She was a 38-year-old elementary school teacher, and together they were raising 2 bright and curious children, 12-year-old Sarah and 9-year-old Josh. They were an ordinary family from suburban Sacramento, California, whose idea of an adventure was a meticulously planned road trip through a national park. They were cautious, prepared, and deeply devoted to one another. Their lives were a collection of school plays, soccer games, and summer vacations, a comfortable and relatable existence that made their eventual fate all the more incomprehensible. They embodied the kind of gentle hopefulness of a family looking forward to a shared experience, utterly unaware that they were driving toward a darkness far more profound than the desert night. Their plan for the summer of 2016 was simple, a classic American road trip. They intended to drive the entirety of U.S. Route 50 through Nevada, a stretch of highway famously dubbed the loneliest road in America by Life magazine. In 1986, they were drawn to its stark beauty and its promise of solitude, a chance to disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with each other. Their itinerary was sensible, with hotel reservations made in the small towns of Fallon, Austin, and Ely. They had packed coolers with water and food, emergency kits for the car, and new cameras for the children to document the journey. This was not a reckless expedition. It was a family vacation designed for safety and enjoyment. A journey from one point of comfort to the next across a landscape of magnificent emptiness. The setting for their disappearance is a character in itself. Central Nevada is a vast and unforgiving expanse, a high desert basin punctuated by stark mountain ranges. It is a place of immense scale and profound silence, where distances are deceptive and the sky feels immense and overpowering. Summer temperatures can soar well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while nights can drop to near freezing. Cell phone service is sporadic at best, non-existent for much of the drive. To travel Route 50 is to accept a certain level of isolation, to understand that you are a small, fragile thing moving through a landscape that is ancient, powerful, and utterly indifferent to human survival. It was into this beautiful, dangerous void that the Peterson family drove their blue Ford Explorer, confident in their plans and their preparation. The last confirmed contact, anyone had with the Petersons was a text message Laura sent to her sister, Rebecca, on the afternoon of July 10th. The message was cheerful and mundane, accompanied by a photo of a weathered sign for a ghost town. Laura wrote that they had just left Fallon and were heading into the great wide open, promising to call that evening when they checked into their hotel in Austin, a tiny community nestled in the Toyabe mountain range. The message conveyed no sense of alarm, no hint of trouble. It was the last message she would ever send, the final digital footprint of a family that was, for all intents and purposes, about to step off the grid and into a terrifying 9-year-long mystery. When the evening of July 10th passed with no phone call, Laura's sister felt a flicker of concern. She knew the family was in a remote area, and she reasoned that a dead cell phone battery or a lack of service at the hotel was the most likely explanation. She decided to wait until morning. But the next morning came and went with no word. By midday, Rebecca's concern had curdled into genuine fear. She called the hotel in Austin where the Petersons had a reservation. The front desk clerk confirmed that the family had never checked in. The room sat empty and waiting. At that moment, a quiet family vacation officially became a missing persons case. Rebecca contacted the Churchill County Sheriff's Office, and the official search began almost immediately. The initial response was robust, driven by the terrifying vulnerability of a family with 2 young children lost in such a harsh environment. The search operation quickly grew into a massive undertaking, a multi-agency effort that included the Nevada Highway Patrol, county sheriffs from 3 different jurisdictions, and dozens of search and rescue volunteers. The scale of the search area was daunting. The stretch of Route 50 between Fallon and Austin is over 100 miles long, flanked on both sides by a seemingly infinite expanse of desert, mountains, and dry lake beds. Finding a single vehicle in that vastness was like looking for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. Canoe helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft scoured the landscape from the air, their crews looking for any glint of metal or flash of color that might be the family's blue SUV. On the ground, teams in 4-wheel drive vehicles and on all-terrain vehicles grid-searched the countless dirt tracks and old mining roads that splintered off from the main highway. They checked remote campsites, abandoned buildings, and isolated springs. The search was systematic and exhaustive, employing the best technology and the most experienced personnel available. Yet day after day, they found nothing. It was as if the Petersons' Ford Explorer, a 2-ton object of steel and glass, had simply evaporated under the blistering Nevada sun. 3 days into the search, a Nevada Highway Patrol trooper made the first and only significant discovery of the entire initial investigation. About 30 miles east of Fallon, he spotted a single set of tire tracks that veered off the asphalt of Route 50 onto the hard-packed desert floor. The tracks were consistent with the make and model of the Petersons' vehicle. They continued straight, heading north into the desert for about half a mile, and then they just stopped. There were no signs of a struggle, no skid marks, no footprints other than those of the investigators themselves. The tracks simply ceased to exist, with no indication of the vehicle turning around or continuing on. It was a physical impossibility, a dead end in the middle of a wide-open plain, and it only deepened the suffocating mystery. Investigators were baffled. Early theories were quickly considered and systematically dismantled by the lack of evidence. The idea that the family had staged their own disappearance to start a new life was immediately dismissed. Their bank accounts and credit cards remained untouched. Their home in Sacramento was left in a state of normal, everyday life, and there was no indication of any marital or financial trouble. They were a stable, happy family with deep roots in their community. The possibility of a car accident seemed equally unlikely. The aerial searches had been extensive, and it was improbable that a wrecked vehicle, even in a deep ravine, would have been missed. Furthermore, the tire tracks leading nowhere contradicted any scenario involving a simple crash or mechanical failure. This left a more sinister possibility: foul play. Had the family been the victim of a carjacking or abduction? This theory also ran into problems. The area where the tracks were found was exceedingly remote, an unlikely spot for a crime of opportunity. There were no signs of another vehicle, no evidence of violence at the scene. Law enforcement checked records for known criminals or transient individuals in the area, but found no viable suspects. The complete absence of any clues was the most maddening part of the investigation. The desert had not only claimed the Peterson family, it had also erased any trace of how it happened, leaving investigators with nothing but an impossible set of tracks and a silence that grew more profound with each passing day. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, with resources stretched thin and all logical leads exhausted, the active search for the Peterson family was officially suspended. It was a heartbreaking decision for the investigators and a devastating blow to the family's relatives. Hope, which had already been dwindling, began to fade completely, replaced by a grim acceptance that they might never know what happened. The case was not closed, but it was moved to the cold case files, a thick binder of reports, maps, and photographs that documented a mystery with no solution. The story of the vanished family became a piece of local folklore, a cautionary tale whispered by residents of the small towns along Route 50, a ghost story about the dangers that lurked in the great empty spaces of the American West. 9 years passed. The world moved on. The children of friends and relatives grew up. The seasons in the Nevada desert cycled through their brutal extremes of heat and cold. The tire tracks left by the Petersons' SUV were long ago erased by wind and rain. The case file gathered dust on a shelf in the sheriff's office. For Michael, Laura, Sarah, and Josh, time had stopped on that hot July afternoon in 2016. For their loved ones, it had become a long, slow torment, a wound that could not heal because there was no closure. The not knowing was a unique form of cruelty, a constant, low-grade ache of grief mixed with an ever-fading sliver of hope. They existed in a state of suspended animation, trapped in the same mystery that had confounded law enforcement years earlier. Then, in August of 2025, the desert decided to speak. The discovery came not from a detective or a search party, but from a team of graduate students from the University of Nevada, Reno. They were working on a geological survey project using ground-penetrating radar to study sediment deposition and the migratory patterns of sand dunes in a remote, little-studied valley in the Desatoya Mountains. The area was miles from any paved road, a place accessible only by rugged off-road vehicles. It was not a place a family on a road trip would ever have reason to be. While analyzing their data, the students noticed a large, dense, and unnaturally rectangular anomaly buried deep beneath the surface of a large, crescent-shaped dune. Their equipment was designed to detect changes in rock and soil density, but this reading was different. It was sharp-edged and metallic. Puzzled and intrigued, they believed it might be a discarded piece of old mining equipment, a common find in rural Nevada. They decided to excavate the object as part of their field work. With shovels and pickaxes, they began to dig into the dune. The sand was fine and compacted, making the work slow and arduous. After digging down nearly 15 feet, one of their shovels struck something hard with a loud metallic clang. They cleared away more sand and uncovered a patch of dark blue painted metal. As they dug further, the shape became unmistakable. It was the roof of a vehicle. A chill went through the small team as they uncovered a luggage rack and then the top of a window frame. They immediately ceased their work and, after driving to a point where they could get a cell signal, contacted the authorities. The Lander County Sheriff's Office responded, and within hours, the remote patch of desert was a major crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape. A full excavation team was brought in, and they worked meticulously under the harsh sun to unearth the vehicle. As the blue Ford Explorer was slowly revealed, it was clear this was the Peterson family's missing SUV. The license plate confirmed it. The vehicle was remarkably well preserved by the dry sand, almost like a museum piece. But the scene was deeply bizarre. The SUV was not wrecked. Its body was largely intact, though dented from the weight of the sand. All its windows were rolled up, and a quick check by investigators revealed the most disturbing detail of all. Every single door was locked from the inside. The team had no choice but to break a rear window to gain access. The air that escaped from the vehicle was stale and dry. Inside, the scene was calm and eerily peaceful. The remains of the 4 family members were there, mummified by the arid environment. Michael was in the driver's seat, Laura beside him. Sarah and Josh were in the back. There were no obvious signs of a violent struggle. It looked as though they had simply fallen asleep. The car's ignition was off, and the keys were in Michael's pocket. But then the lead investigator noticed the detail that would redefine the entire case. Michael Peterson's seatbelt was not unbuckled. It was sliced cleanly in half, the 2 ends hanging loosely over his shoulder and lap. The cut was straight and perfect, a single, deliberate act that shattered the illusion of a peaceful end. The discovery of the vehicle and its occupants transformed the 9-year-old cold case into an active homicide investigation. The Ford Explorer was carefully lifted from its sandy grave by a crane and transported on a flatbed truck to the State Forensic Laboratory in Reno. Here, under the bright lights of the autopsy bay and the sterile environment of the garage, the car and its occupants would finally surrender their secrets. Pathologists determined that the cause of death for all 4 family members was not dehydration or heat stroke, as one might expect in the desert. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. The levels of the gas in the vehicle's interior, even after so many years, were detectable in tissue samples. This family had not gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. They had been poisoned. This forensic breakthrough was the turning point. The scene in the car suddenly took on a new, sinister meaning. The locked doors were not a sign of a family protecting itself, but of a perpetrator sealing them inside. The cut seatbelt was no longer just a mystery. It was an action taken by a killer. Perhaps Michael had been moved after his death, and the killer needed to cut the belt to reposition his body. The entire case was recontextualized. Investigators were no longer looking for a lost family. They were hunting for a murderer, someone who had possessed the means, the motive, and the cruelty to execute an entire family and then bury their vehicle so thoroughly that it remained hidden for nearly a decade. BR detectives from the Nevada Division of Investigation were assigned to the case, and they started from the very beginning. They pulled the old case file, with its maps of the original search area and the report about the tire tracks that led to nowhere. That single bizarre clue, once a frustrating dead end, was now the key. The location where the tracks stopped became the new ground zero for the investigation. Working on the assumption that the killer had intercepted the family there, the detectives began to scrutinize the area, in a way that hadn't been done before. They pulled property records for every parcel of land, no matter how small or remote, within a 20-mile radius of that spot. Most of the land was owned by the Federal Bureau of Land Management, but a few small, privately owned parcels were scattered throughout the basin. One name stood out. The property was a 40-acre mining claim, located about 3 miles north of Route 50, deep in the desert and accessible only by a single unmarked dirt road. The owner was a man named Silas Kane, who was in his late 70s. A background check revealed that Kane was a recluse who had lived on the property for over 50 years. He had a minor criminal record from decades ago, an assault charge, a dispute with a neighbor, but nothing recent. More telling, however, were archived sheriff's deputy field reports from the area. Over the years, several tourists and travelers had reported a strange and hostile man matching Kane's description, who had confronted them for stopping their cars near his property, accusing them of being government agents or spies. He was known locally as a paranoid eccentric, a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. The detectives felt a surge of adrenaline. This was a viable suspect. They began a quiet surveillance of Kane's property. It was a ramshackle compound, a collection of old trailers and sheds surrounded by a fence adorned with "No trespassing" signs. He lived completely off the grid, with a few solar panels for power and a well for water. Most importantly, parked next to one of the sheds was an old, heavily modified tractor. It was equipped with a powerful-looking industrial winch and a large, custom-fabricated steel blade on the front, almost like a small private bulldozer. It was a piece of equipment more than capable of dragging a 2-ton SUV across the desert and burying it under tons of sand. The circumstantial evidence was piling up, and the investigators knew they had to move. They obtained a search warrant for Silas Kane's property. The raid was conducted at dawn. A team of state and county officers descended on the isolated compound, taking the elderly Kane completely by surprise. He was wiry and weathered, with suspicious eyes that darted back and forth as the officers swarmed his property. He offered no resistance, only a silent, simmering contempt. The search of his dilapidated home and workshops began. The property was a hoarder's maze of junk, old machinery, and decades of accumulated refuse. For hours, the search turned up nothing concrete. Then a young detective, sifting through a dusty cardboard box full of old electronics in the back of a workshop, found it. It was a small silver digital camera, its casing cracked and its lens coated in a fine layer of dust. The detective removed the memory card, Denvader back. At the mobile command post, the card was inserted into a laptop. After a moment, images began to appear on the screen. There were dozens of photos of desert landscapes, blurry pictures of roadside attractions, and smiling portraits of the Peterson family on their trip. It was Sarah Peterson's camera. The final photo on the card was time-stamped on the afternoon of July 10th, 2016. It was a blurry, hastily taken shot, looking out from the passenger window of their SUV. In the distance, framed by the desert scrub, was Silas Kane's ramshackle compound. The family had likely stopped on the highway to take a picture of the strange, isolated settlement, an act of innocent curiosity that had sealed their fate. When confronted with the camera, Silas Kane's stoic silence finally broke. He was taken to an interview room at the sheriff's office, and over the course of the next 2 hours, he confessed to the murders of all 4 members of the Peterson family. His confession was delivered in a flat, emotionless monotone, devoid of any remorse. His motive was as petty as it was insane. He told the detectives that he had lived in constant fear that the government was trying to steal his land and his mining rights. He was deeply paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere. When he saw the Petersons' blue SUV with its California plates slow down and stop on the highway near his property, and saw them point a camera in his direction, he was certain they were government surveyors in disguise. He decided he had to act. He explained how he drove his truck down to the highway and, using a set of tire spikes, disabled their vehicle. He then approached them, feigning concern and offering to help. He told them he would give them a ride to his compound where he had a proper radio to call for a tow truck. The trusting family agreed. Once he had them at his isolated property, he herded them into a small, windowless workshop. It was there that he used a hose connected to the exhaust of a generator to pump the room full of carbon monoxide. After they were dead, his work began. He drove Michael's body back to the SUV, cutting the seatbelt to move him into the driver's seat. He then ferried the rest of the family back to their car, one by one, placing them inside and locking the doors. Finally, using his modified tractor, he dragged the entire vehicle for miles into the dune field, a place he knew was constantly changing. He dug a massive pit and buried the car, confident the shifting sands would hide his crime forever. Silas Cain was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. His defense team attempted an insanity plea, but prosecutors argued that the meticulous planning and execution of the crime, particularly the elaborate effort to hide the evidence, demonstrated a clear understanding of his actions. The jury agreed. After a 2-week trial, Silas Cain was found guilty on all counts. The judge, calling his actions a crime of unimaginable cruelty born from a hateful and cowardly paranoia, sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to Ely State Prison, a maximum security facility where he would spend the rest of his life. The story of the Peterson family is a chilling reminder of the fragility of ordinary life. They were not victims of the vast, indifferent desert, which is a danger that can be prepared for. They did not perish because of a mistake or a mechanical failure. They were erased from the world because they crossed the path of a hidden monster, a man whose mind was a desolate landscape of paranoia and malice. Their innocent vacation, a journey into the heart of America's great wilderness, ended in a sandy grave, not because of the forces of nature, but because of the banal and senseless evil that can fester in the lonely, forgotten corners of the world.